In this video, we'll get into the menu settings. So there's all kinds of things waiting for us there. The very first thing we can do is we can reset the settings. So I already have changed a setting on my computer. This echo render is a little different than it is by default. If you ever think the settings got out of hand or something went wrong, I can always just reset only the settings. My sketches will be left untouched. That's really clear and important. And I say, okay, and now I'm back to the default settings. I can import my settings, I can export my settings, so maybe I'll come back to these after I change things the way I like it. By default, we are live coding. What does that mean? It means that we can change stuff right on the fly. So I will maybe position this stuff a little bit off center, 100, and then this movement will be a bit different, or even 200. Now it's going to kind of sway around. But that happened automatically. If, say, I wanted to introduce a class or do a whole lot of coding, maybe a loop, and I don't want to worry about this happening right away, I could disable live coding. And then what that means is if I want to make a loop, let I equal 0, I is less than 5, I plus plus. Let's just surround this and have a bunch of these. It hasn't done anything. None of the code has been updated. Just so you know, if you're editing a loop, it won't auto-compile, just out of safety to try and keep you from having a broken loop. So auto-compile live coding only happens if you're not on a for or while loop. But now I could say, hey, let's have a bunch of these things that are I times 50. Let's see what that looks like. Control Enter to recompile. Maybe it should be 150. Nope, 50 was better. Maybe even 20, 40, maybe times mouse X, so that I can test out what is the right size and kind of play with that being interactive. Okay, losing track of what I'm doing. I times 50, let's leave it at that. I can turn this on and off with a shortcut, Control A. You'll see this turns on and off, and this is nice while performing. If you know you're going to need to type in a bunch of code and you don't want it compiling on you, I can turn that on and off. We can also adjust how fast it recompiles. So this is after you've last pressed a key, how many milliseconds should it wait? Half a second, 2 seconds if you want it to wait a little longer for you, quarter second if you're a super fast typer and you think you can handle that. Echo render, what does this do? What this means is by default with echo render, if I ever leave the browser, so I'm going to make a new tab, move it off to the side, you'll see that P5Live paused the sketch. And this is really nice to prevent the computer from sort of wasting resources if that's not even the tab that I have in front of me. But if I disable that echo render, I'm now on this tab, it keeps rendering. And I always uncheck this if I'm performing with this, just in case I have to leave the window for some reason, or if I'm streaming or doing some kind of, maybe also with teaching, just to let the thing constantly be running, especially if I'm switching between programs. But when you're just sketching and no one's watching, maybe it's nice to have it active. So if you're looking something up, it's not using your computer. Console, you could disable. This is if I print something, FrameCount, you'll see I'm up to 84,000. That'll sound surprising. I'll explain it in a minute. But we can hide the console if we definitely don't want to see it, or we turn it on and it turns itself off after not using it for a little while. Like if it only had to print a little message, it's just a quick temporary console. We can always check the real console in our browser. And real quick about frame count, I'll explain this again. I'll probably explain it a few times. The frame count is constant in P5Live. Why is that helpful? Because I have a bunch of things here based on frame count, and every time I compile, it keeps track of where I was instead of starting over from 0, what normally happens when you start a new sketch. So this is more of a performance kind of thing. We can always override it by forcing the frame count to start at 0. I can say var frame count equals 0. And now every time I recompile, that's what normally would happen. But I think it's nice that this continues to grow so that as you change stuff, it's not so disruptive. Okay, the menu tab is this little tab here that you could click on to open and close this panel. I always turn it off because I can use the control panel, the shortcut to say control comma to turn that on and off, control M to show myself the menu. But it's fairly translucent, so most people wouldn't see it if this was being projected. So I turn that off. Snapshot code. If I take a snapshot, control S or using the export panel, it just downloaded both a copy. There it is, it just finished. It took a little longer. It saves a copy of what I see, a PNG, and a copy of the code at this exact state. I think this is really nice for while you're working to constantly take snapshots of what you see, and this way you're getting a copy of the code with when it looked like that, in case you just keep editing the code and changing it, and then you forget, what was the code with that picture I really liked. So I leave this on. If it's too many files, you can disable it. Line numbers are just that. Default, it starts out that it's on. This is helpful for students, especially when you're teaching and showing code to be able to reference and talk about the same number. Maybe in performance, I turn it off. Autocomplete. Autocomplete can be activated inside of P5Live by starting to type something. No, maybe it's fill. Option space brings this thing up with all of the P5 functions, and it's like no fill. Yep, there we go. If I turn on autocomplete as I start to type stuff, no stroke, it suggests these things while I'm typing, and it also prevents it from trying to compile until I finish and close this little menu. So I could say, yep, that's what I wanted. And now I technically turned off the stroke, but in the wrong spot. There we go. Now we see nothing because no fill, no stroke. So autocomplete is great also when you're first learning P5.js. You might want that on. Locking the code on drag, that means if I'm interacting with my sketch and I'm able to use the mouse, if mouse pressed, for example, it could be dangerous if I see the code and I accidentally start to drag this code around. So by default, I lock the editor, but if I turn that off, then if somehow I can do it, maybe I can't do it. Once in a while it happens. I can't do it now. Anyways, it happens. I think it's good to leave this on. Passing the key through on KeyPress essentially means if I wasn't drawing this, let's have this and turn one off and just say, draw me the latest key. Technically, I have a little keyboard now. I can just type a key. If I say pass the key through, then even when I'm typing here, it's showing up and going into my sketch. So this can be really interesting. You can make sketches that are like meta sketches. So as you code, you see the code text showing up in your sketch. Usually I turn it off just to not confuse myself. Notifications are these little turning things when I disable things just to remind myself. I can turn those on and off. Tooltips are these little things that kind of help you throughout the program to remind you what they are. Maybe you want those off once you really know it. This Multi-P5LIVE Warning is if I open this up in another window and I say, let's go there a second time, it warns me that I had this open twice and I could lose data. And this is really dangerous to have P5Live open 2 times because every change we make affects our local storage. So if I make changes in this tab and then I go back to this tab, it might not have those updates. And then I start to make a change here and it overwrites changes I had already made. So by default, I warn you and say, hey, be careful, you accidentally opened it multiple times. Sometimes you know what you're doing and you don't want that warning, so you can ask it to be quiet and at your own risk. I've warned you. Timestamp exports, you can disable if you don't like this fact that when you save a screenshot or a sketch that it was adding the timestamp. I'm a fan of timestamps, so it reminds me, hey, which year, month, day, hour, minute, second that happened for being keeping track of just chronology. But if that's super annoying, you can disable this. And backup co-coding is later when I get into co-coding. If my server ever went offline while you were co-coding, if it lost its WebSocket connection, it would quickly back up a copy of what you're working on into your sketches. So I think it's a good thing to just leave on. We can adjust the font size of our editor as we wish. 55, I can make this thing huge. I can make it really tiny. 15 is default. Control plus minus allow me to change up, but not when I'm sitting on that. That's good to know. I can just quickly use control plus and minus to adjust this thing. We can put background on our code. It might be nice at times to hide this. It depends on the contrast of what you're showing us. You can also change the color of what that background is. And there's just a few themes that we can change to. By default, it's sort of all intended to be sort of for performance with the dark themes. But of course, you can modify P5Live and bring other themes in there that you prefer. There's also key bindings. I'm getting more and more used to the built-in Ace editor. That's this text editor I'm using. It has all sorts of fancy features that are great to work with. But if you're using other editors all the time, feel free to change the key bindings so most of your shortcuts will work. Backups, you can have this automatically back up all of your sketches and settings every time you close the window, once a day if it's been more than a day since you last did it, weekly, monthly, or now. And you can press that button, and now I have a full backup of P5Live, which if I drag and drop it, it says, hey, this looks like a backup. Do you want to import your settings, your sketches? Do you want to skip duplicates? So this is really important whenever you are moving from one browser to another. If you move from the online P5Live to the offline, I want to clone all my settings and sketches, so I just back it up. Again, our local storage is unique per domain, per port, and per browser. So if I decide I switch and want to use Firefox or Safari or any other browser, then I should just back up everything I've been doing in P5Live and then just drag and drop that file into P5Live in another browser. Last but not least, we have our shortcuts. Another video will talk about what all of the shortcuts do, but what's important in the settings is that you can change them. So I demonstrated that really quick before. I'll change my live coding toggle from Control A, there it's turning on and off, to be Control Shift A. And now it got a little hard to read because that's too long. I should fix this, but now Control Shift A turns it on and off. I'm going to put it back. I just click on it. It turns green. Control A. And now that's fine. So now Control A turns this on and off. And last but not least, hiding behind my picture here is, let's move this out of the way, the be very careful if you click it button. This resets P5Live. It's going to trash the settings and your sketches. If I press this, I get a warning saying everything will be removed. And the reason I do this is I did it before starting this tutorial series to make sure mine looked just like yours. I backed everything up. I reset P5Live, and then I could have a fresh view of it. If anything goes wrong, maybe it's worth backing up your sketches and trying this. But I'm going to say cancel because I want to keep this progressing as it goes. I could demonstrate it real quick. Actually, I'll just prove this backup works. Let's hope this works. I'm going to back up now. We can see my sketches are sitting here. I'm going to reset P5Live and say, okay, It starts everything over. It's that very first splash screen. We're on new. It's like you fell back into the first video. All I have to do to bring everything back is say, let's look at that backup file. It found a backup. I have sketches. Let's say, okay. Replace the settings as well. Yes, please. And everything is back to how I had it. Whoops. Let's go back to our sketch. I have to press a key. I didn't want that sketch. I wanted this sketch. There we go. And in my settings, yep, it kept track of the menu tab. Timestamps got turned off. Everything is back to how it was. So that is the settings panel. That's it for this video.